to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines. Well, the truth is very simple, very hard to find.
Good day. My name is William Flick. I'm sitting in for Tom D'Ambra tonight. I've got a lot of material to cover, but I'll get right to a story that's come to my attention recently in the American Free Press. It says, Fox News, in its zeal to incite hatred, has been screaming about the secret money man behind the so-called Ground Zero Mosque. But a funny thing happened. A rare, honest investigative journalist, almost extinct in the mass media jungle, dug up the facts. Sam Gustin of Daily Finance discovered that the mysterious money man, Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, the Warren Buffett of Saudi Arabia, is the second largest shareholder of News Corp, the global conglomerate that owns Fox News. Now, this is what I said last week, that you're not going to get the complete story from any of the 5 corporation-owned networks. That's 90% of the media, magazines, movies, TV, radio. 90% of the media is owned by 5 corporations. So there's some stories will come through in their midst, but they're usually watered down or spun to make it look like it was, oh, how stupid we were. And I can only tell you I've had personal experiences with people that were in the military that have confided in me. Some really good friends that I trust 100% would want in my foxhole in a battle. One of them was a friend of mine in high school who in 1968 wrote me a letter while he was handing out auto parts in a airplane hangar. The motor pool was in the back, and they were bringing in the dead bodies in body bags and placing them in rows in front of him on the floor. As he was handing out auto parts, he said he witnessed special forces bringing in bricks of heroin, putting the heroin in the body bags. This is 1968. I was just barely out of high school. I remember the letter clear as a bell. It was the first time I was confronted with a piece of information that I didn't want to believe. And this is hard stuff to believe, I know. But we'll go into this here. I want to cover something called the false flag operations, black operations. Now, according to a gentleman by the name of Joe Trento, who wrote the CIA, Secret History of the CIA, he claims that when Jimmy Carter came into office, George Bush, the previous CIA director under Gerald Ford, helped to move black operations to Saudi Arabia. Now, at that time, the people that were around at the time know that this was just after Watergate. The Church Committee was looking into the CIA rogue operations. So Joe Trento makes his claim that Bush and the CIA went to the black operations, the most covert, went to Saudi Arabia and went rogue, went in most cases outside of government, dealing only with corporations. And some of the famous cases of false flags, Operation Gladio, where after World War II, we had people assassinating foreign leaders in Europe, where if they were communists running in a democratically prone system, they would go over and assassinate these people. This is outright international criminality, but as you can see, we've gotten away with it. Operation Phoenix in Vietnam, it's the same thing. We assassinated Diem, the first, when we were first getting involved in Vietnam, John Kennedy, who was probably a better president than a lot of the people since him even so, was involved in this kind of black operations. They killed DM. His wife was touring the country and the world trying to bring awareness to what had happened in her country. Now, around that time, we had something called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. On two different occasions on public radio, I've heard Robert Byrd, the deceased Robert Byrd, and John McCain in two separate interviews say that the Gulf of Tonkin incident was a hoax. Now, John McCain was in the war, and he admitted it was a hoax. And they could have told the 58,000 people that died. Now, in World War II, I had a book called it's written by Curtis Dahl, Roosevelt's son-in-law, My Poor Exploited Father-in-Law, I believe was the name of it. In it, it had the letter written by Admiral Kimmel of Pearl Harbor, asking why he was being left defenseless in the days just prior to Pearl Harbor attack. By the way, Kimmel and Short, the other admiral, were both reinstated in the late 90s. They both reclaimed their commissions, and it was because this information came to light that it wasn't their doing, that it was the higher-ups that wanted to get us into the Second World War. Now, these false flag operations, they just didn't end back then. In the mid-90s, we had several things happening. In the very beginning of the 90s, we had the Randy Weaver standoff in Idaho, where Weaver was lured into a situation. He ended up not being in court the day he needed to be, and they ended up coming out to his house with an army, and they mass murdered the people inside. It was only a few people, but there were more bullets in that house than you could probably count. And Weaver ended up winning a $3 million plus lawsuit. The jury foreman said they considered the government having committed murder in the case, but there was nothing done other than they handed him money and everything went on its merry way. And then came Oklahoma City. No, I'm wrong there. The 93 Twin Towers were the next attack. Now, this is a strange attack. The government brings this man from Egypt named Ahmad Salem. He's an Egyptian general. He comes here, and he's working for the FBI undercover. He infiltrates this group, the Blind Sheik. The Blind Sheik, Rahmad. And he infiltrates the group, and his handler, John Antichev, an FBI agent, a higher-up, he goes to him and he says, look, I don't want live detonators. Well, Antichev makes him take the detonators, and they use live bombs, even though Ahmad Salem knew he could have had those people otherwise without those live munitions. Now, he taped Antichev telling him that, so he was covered in a court of law, or else they probably would have hung him along with the Blind Sheik and his group. Now, in this book I have here, The Assassination Business, I have something here. I believe it's this right here. When Rahman wanted to enter the USA in 1990, his visa was originally refused by the American embassy in Cairo, who recognized him for what he was, a lifelong terrorist, an enemy of the Egyptian state, and a hardline terrorist for whom America was the great Satan. The embassy bureaucrats were overruled by more powerful interests in the State Department in Washington, who led him in. Once in the USA, Rahman's mosque in New York quickly became a hotbed for Islamic fundamentalism. And that's where they started to formulate the attack on the Trade Center in '93. And this is goes on and on. I have Michael Springman, a report right after the 9/11. Michael Springman was the former head of the American Visa Bureau in Jeddah. Springman says, I was repeatedly ordered by high-level State Department officials to issue visas to unqualified applicants. Now, this went on all the way to the year 2002. I believe they called it Saudi Express or something, Visa Express. It was just a joke in the State Department. I actually know somebody that worked in the State Department and admitted all this. Now, what's really strange is in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, we have a journalist by the name of Jana Davis that worked for Channel 4 Oklahoma City who uncovered that there were 3,500 Iraqi Republican Guard moved to Oklahoma City prior to the Oklahoma City bombing. Those 3,500 Iraqi Republican Guard worked in tandem with the CIA and the Defense Intelligence, supplying information on Saddam Hussein during those years during the Iran-Iraq War and up through the 90s. She actually, Jana Davis, the reporter, actually handpicked the gentleman she claimed after seeing footage of the Murrah building in Oklahoma, the bombing. She saw the second man get out of the Ryder truck, and she picked him out of a book of photographs of those 3,500 Iraqi Republican Guards. She identified the gentleman. And there are reports that he was working in baggage in the Logan Airport on the 2001 9/11. Now, the thing is, I want to make clear is, in my own personal life, I've run into people that have confided in me about criminal activity. I have friends that are personally aware of the drug running by the CIA and the NSA. I ran into a gentleman that was going to the VA down in White River Junction, and he told me a story where he was doing false flag activity in a country we weren't even involved in a war in. This is back during the Nixon years. And so these kind of activity are not as hidden as a lot of people would like them to be. The only problem is the general people and the general masses are so prone to not believe that their government could be that criminal. And it isn't the government, it's individuals and the networks that have been allowed to promulgate at the lower levels, just below the higher ups, like the second and third degree. And what I mean by that is I have a video at home. It's Colonel James Bo Greitz was given $4 million by Ross Perot to go look for POWs in Southeast Asia. James Greitz is in the back of a pickup truck. He holds up a newspaper. It says $4 million going to the anti-drug aid in Burma. And James Greitz looks at the camera and says, I used to have to ride a mule in to meet with this general. And the general he was meeting with, he was going to see if there were any POWs left or from the Vietnam War. The general he was meeting with was nicknamed Kun Sa. And Kun Sa met with Bo Greitz, James Greitz, the colonel, and he asked him point blank, General, can you tell me the name of an American within the government that has been running drugs into the United States? And Kun Sa looks at him and says, Richard Armitage. Now, Richard Armitage is still in the United States government, in the State Department, Assistant Secretary of State or somewhere in that chain of command. He's been there since Jimmy Carter. Well, Jimmy Carter got us involved in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been a drug state forever. They've been running the heroin out of there forever. See, this stuff goes back quite a ways for me. I've been following this since 1970. So this isn't anything new. And these names keep popping up. Now, when in the Central American drug running, it was Southern Air Transport. They were running the cocaine from Central and South America through Mena, Arkansas, and Homestead Air Force Base. Now, I witnessed Barry Seal, the drug runner, who was working for, he claimed, Oliver North and George Bush Sr. I witnessed him in front of the narco-terrorism hearings. Several people were in front of that committee with bags over their heads. They were so afraid. Two people that were high up the level that I guess figured they wouldn't kill him was Terry Reid, one pilot, and Barry Seal, who they did eventually kill. Barry Seal ran the drugs into Mena. Now in Mena, that was in Arkansas through the 80s. No, the DEA were not allowed to touch Barry Seal. Barry Seal was running the guns, helping to run the guns to the Contras and to all kinds of groups. He helped the CIA install Fidel Castro. But when they were doing it through Mena, Bill Clinton was governor. Now, it would only make sense that this operation, to keep it covered up, they would give something like the presidency to Bill Clinton so there would be a continuity in this illegal government operations, which most of them are involved in when you get to that level of our government. Now, in 1990, there was a journalist by the name of Danny Casolaro. I have this article here. It's out of the Boston Globe, 8/14/91. It says, was writer the victim of a D.C. conspiracy? Well, Danny Casolaro was investigating the collapse of the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, the BCCI, the Iran-Contra scandal. He was looking into the October surprise. His brother, a doctor, he called his brother on a Friday night, said he was meeting with a congressional aide connected to Robert Byrd. The next day, he was in a Martinsburg, West Virginia motel. They came in and found him dead in a hot bathtub. They claimed he had sliced his wrist. They found a towel with the blood that they had wiped up off the floor underneath the sink when they got there. So it did not look like he had done it to himself. And on top of it, they had embalmed his body. So his brother, who was a doctor, couldn't get to him in time to see if they had done anything chemically to him to induce a state where he couldn't fight back. So this story was out here. I confronted Bernie Sanders on it. I asked him to look into it, and I'm sure he never would touch that story. But here, this next story was it's from the Boston Globe, December 13th, 2004. Gary Webb, at 49, wrote series linking CIA to cocaine sales. Okay, now Gary Webb is a special thing for me. He wrote for the San Jose Mercury News. He had a series in there called Dark Alliance. Dark Alliance turned into a book. It was all about the drug running by the Contras and the CIA into the United States, Homestead Air Force Base. As a matter of fact, Barry Seal, I saw him testify saying he flew a C-130 into Homestead, thought he was going to jail. He was sure he was being set up. They gave him a briefcase with $75,000 and walked him to the gate and shook his hand, told him, job well done. So this stuff is pretty touch and go with these guys that are even carrying it out. They're not even sure if they're going to be murdered or put in jail. So Gary Webb was on a show one night. I called him and I asked him if this was the drug running by way of Bush and these people, if it was in any way connected to the British East India Company drug running of the Opium Wars. And he said it was the same, essentially the same international finance families that were doing this. Now, the strange thing about Gary Webb is he shot himself in the head twice. And there are people that question whether that could even be done. But here is an article, Associated Press. It says, CIA admits withholding drug data. Now, here it is. When they had the Contra hearings and then narco-terrorism hearings, they admit that they withheld information from those committees having to do with all this, the drug running and that these other people were uncovering. Now, the reason I wanted to cover the drug running first, before I got into any of the other stuff, so there's a woman out there by the name of Sibel Edmonds. Now, I don't know if anybody's taping this. If you are, you're working for this FBI or whoever. How are you doing? But anyways, the woman's name, Sibel Edmonds, worked for the FBI. So if you work for the FBI, look into her. You'll be shocked. I'm sure you can get some of the documents. Sibel Edmonds, Sibeledmonds. I heard Sibel Edmonds right after the 9/11 event. And she was being interviewed, and she said, the people inside the State Department that are involved in drug running were the ones involved in the 9/11 event. And that struck me a chord with me because I had been following the drug running. And the drug running works like this. The drug runners that work for the government can do all they want. They can do anything they want and they can get away with it. The people that are doing drug running independently are the people that get arrested. So that's how that works. I would imagine it does the same in the terrorism. I have no reason to believe otherwise. Now, Sibel Edmonds said she read the communiques prior to and just after the 9/11 event. She was a Turkish woman who was an Arabic translator for the FBI. So she knows what she's talking about. Now, Sibel Edmonds, I'd like to move down to Norman Mineta. Norman Mineta was with Vice President Dick Cheney on the morning of 9/11. And I'd like to read to you a statement by Norman Mineta, if I can find it here. Here we go. All right. This is what he says to the... Now, he's in front of the 9/11 committee worldwide on C-SPAN. This is how ridiculously corrupt our system is worldwide, that somebody can make a statement like this and then nobody even look into it. And Mineta says, during the time that the airplane was coming into the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, do the orders still stand? And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Okay. So what I just read is Norman Mineta saying that they knew in advance what was going on. Now, I saw an interview with Norman Mineta after he made that statement, and he stands by that statement. And nobody has looked into it. So I would have to say there's more evidence of the 5 media conspiracy of silence right there. Now, there's some references in this book, 9/11 Synthetic Terror by Webster Griffin Tarpley. He also has, it says, The FBI office where she worked was staffed by members of the very same Middle Eastern organization whose wiretap conversations the office was working to translate. So she was working right in bed with these people. Now, they're on the morning of 9/11. There were 5 drills, one of them Vigilant Guardian. That comes out of Aviation Week and Space Technology, June 3rd, 2002. Vigilant Warrior, Northern Vigilance, Northern Guardian, the National Reconnaissance Office, and one that wasn't connected directly to the military was Tripod 2 that was being carried out supposedly the next day after the 9/11 event, which is going to be run by the New York City and the U.S. Department of Justice with Rudy Giuliani overseeing it. Now, what is pretty frustrating with the 9/11 event is that it's so obvious that there's a complicity with our government. It's so obvious. How could any planes, 4 planes, ride around with their transponders off for hours and nothing even happen? That is so bizarre. But people continue to believe that fantasy. Now, there's another gentleman, I can go down this list, who was there the day of the bombing, of the plane attacks. His name is William Rodriguez. He was a janitor, and I've seen several hours of his testimony. He was a hero. He was the last man out of the building. He received an award from George W. Bush for being a hero. He maintains that the bombs went off before the planes hit. He went down into the sub-basement, found a friend of his, a co-worker, with his skin hanging off his arms from a blast that had destroyed a compressor down there. He carried the guy to the door, helped him to get out of the building, and while they're on their way to the door, the plane hit the first building. Now, William Rodriguez is constantly discredited in the mainstream media. But in the beginning, he wasn't, until they found out that he was trying to tell the truth. Now, there's another gentleman in a similar situation, Barry Jennings. He was the Housing Authority Public Safety Director. Mr. Jennings was in Building 7. Building 7 wasn't hit by any planes. If you watch the footage of when it goes down, you'll notice how the building, you can see the energy run right through the building of an explosion, and then it goes down in its own footprint. Mr. Jennings was in that building. He was on the 8th floor going down to the 7th floor in a stairwell, he said. And then a blast went off, and he got blown back up to the 8th floor. Now, the 9/11 Commission says there was no bombs in those buildings, but all kinds of firemen, Lou Caccioli of one of the fire department fire companies, he in People magazine admits that there were bombs in the building. There are all kinds. There are groups of firemen that are fighting this. And there's another gentleman by the name of David Shippers. David Shippers was on the Clinton committee to impeach. He was a Chicago prosecutor. David Shippers gathered information on Clinton. He was friendly to John Ashcroft on a first-name basis. Several dozen FBI agents, 2 of them being Robert Wright and John Vincent, FBI agents, came to David Shippers and asked him to represent them with the Attorney General. David Shippers got on the phone to get a hold of John Ashcroft, who he was on a first-name basis with, and Ashcroft wouldn't return his calls. It happened over and over again. FBI agent Harry Sammet contacted his superiors 71 times in emails about Moussaoui, and they never got back to him. Another case of the FBI higher-ups not wanting to know was Able Danger, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer. He was a Marine lieutenant colonel. He was in an intelligence unit by the name of Able Danger. They had Muhammad Atta in his scopes, and the FBI didn't want Muhammad Atta. There's a journalist out there by the name of Daniel Hopsiker who made a video by the name of the Venice Flying Circus all about how the Rudy Deckers had trained these people on these little planes that they couldn't possibly have been able to carry out these kind of things. These people were patsies. They were. Some of them had addresses at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. 3 of the so-called hijackers. There's just too many holes. The FBI were renting homes to these guys. They were their handlers. They were renting cars to them. There's just an unbelievable amount of complicity with the FBI, and yet nothing was. They couldn't foil these attacks. Now, David Shippers, as of now, just like Sibel Edmonds, has a gag order on him. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Stephen Jones, who is a professor at Brigham Young University. He's a physicist. And Stephen Jones has had in his possession the dust from the Twin Towers blast. Now, that dust, he maintains, has particles of thermal nitrate in the dust itself, and that is a high-tech explosive. And he says there are a lot of it that hadn't gone off, and there are traces of it all throughout that dust. So, and the group that he's affiliated with is Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I would suggest that you look into 9/11 Truth and the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth if you think that this is just a hoax. I have one last thing on this list here. A gentleman by the name of Larry Silverstein. Now, Larry Silverstein rented the whole Twin Towers complex from the Port Authority in New York. Larry Silverstein was the rental agent. He took out a severely weighted insurance policy in late July 2001 so he could get billions in returns if anything happened to the Twin Towers. Now, the Twin Towers had an asbestos problem and was under consideration to be torn down anyway. Larry Silverstein made the remarkable remark, and people have seen it, heard it, and they're still trying to spin it away here, where he says that the fire department and him had seen so much loss of life that day that they decided to pull Building 7. And he meant demolish. Now, to pull a building would have meant that it would have had to have had prior setting. They would have had to have done that weeks in advance to come up with the precision places to put the explosives to bring it down upon its own footprint. Now, the people in charge at the Twin Towers up until that time were a company run by one of the Bush sons, Marvin Bush. Now, I have no idea the connection there, but there are people that maintain that the cameras were turned off for 2 weeks prior to the attack, so anything could have happened. Just like in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, people were seen going in and out of the building that were involved in other things that were involved in the infrastructure of the building. Now, I'd like to show you, or I'd like to read from an unclassified document called Operation Northwoods. And it says, based on the premise that U.S. military intervention will result from a period of heightened U.S.-Cuban tensions, which place the United States in the position of suffering justifiable grievances. So what they're looking for here is a justifiable reason to attack Cuba. Okay, and it's connected to Operation Mongoose, which was an attempt to kill Castro. Okay, and it says inputs will be used as a basis for developing a time-phase plan. They wanted a plan to go into Cuba. Okay, they needed a reason. This is where the false flag comes in. This is what they're always doing. So here we go. Incidents to establish a credible attack. Rumors, clandestine radio they want to use. Land friendly Cubans in uniform to stage attack on base, on our base. They're going to have Cubans attack our base. Capture friendly saboteurs inside the base. See? Start riots near the base with their friendly Cubans. These are all false things they're doing to make the American people come in line. And this goes on over and over again. Blow up ammunition inside the base. Start fires. Burn aircraft on the base. Lob mortar. Capture assault teams approaching from the sea. Obviously artificial assault teams. Sabotage ship in harbor. We know all about that one. Remember the Maine. Sink ship near harbor entrance. Okay. They even say remember the Maine. We could blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba. We could blow up a drone, unmanned vessel anywhere in the Cuban waters. We could arrange to cause such incident in the vicinity of Havana or Santiago as a spectacular result of a Cuban attack from the air or sea or both. We could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area. A Cuban-based Castro-supported filibuster could be simulated against a neighboring Caribbean nation. All right, so there's a whole plan here. It is possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shot down a chartered civil airliner armed with the United States. The destination will be chosen only to cause a flight plan route to cross Cuba. So in other words, they were going to shoot a plane down or pretend and have an artificial list of people that they could say Cuba had shot down. Now, that was turned down by John Kennedy. The Joint Chief of Staff that wrote it was L.L. Lemnitzer. He was a general, I believe. And he went on to be an advisor to George Bush Sr. during his campaign for presidency. Now, I have a book here called Crude Politics. I haven't gotten into it much yet, but it maintains there's no conspiracy. Okay, I have a picture right here of Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam when he's selling them the chemicals to kill the Kurds and the Iranians. Okay, now here we have the name of the section is called Back in the Game in Crude Politics. It says, on September 12, 2001, the day after the al-Qaeda attacks in New York and Washington, D.C., Deputy Secretary of State Armitage, who also happens to be a former Caspian oil lobbyist, met at Foggy Bottom with the Pakistani intelligence chief who put the Taliban in power, General Mahmoud Ahmed. Ahmed wasn't flown in after the September 11 attacks. He had been in town the previous week, meeting with the other top Bush administration officials. The full agenda and list of participants are still shrouded in secrecy, but this much is known. Armitage asked that Pakistan sever ties with the Taliban. Now, I believe it's in here. Armitage goes on to ask for money. I'm not exactly sure it's in one of these books. millions of dollars to help finance the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. Now, the Northern Alliance were the ones that were growing the poppies and developing the heroin crop in Afghanistan. And he goes to the Congress and pleads for $250 million to finance the Northern Alliance. Now, I'll go back to the statement by Khun Sa, the Burmese drug dealer. He was the guy that ran what they call the Golden Triangle. When James Greitz, highest decorated Green Beret in Vietnam, says to Khun Sa, "Who's the drug runner in the government?" He says, "Richard Armitage." What does Armitage do as soon as we topple the Taliban, who, by the way, stopped the heroin production? He gets $250 million to help the Northern Alliance. Just recently, the UN says that Afghanistan is the largest narco state in the world as of their last report. Not that the UN is anything I'm comfortable in quoting from, believe me. But here we go. The State Department, at the behest of Deputy Secretary Armitage, lifted the previous administration's objections to arming the Northern Alliance in the spring. So he goes on to push for the new drug growers. All right. Now, in fact, the military's powerful intelligence wing, the notorious ISI, or Inter-Services Intelligence, helped put the Taliban in power. And that's from Jane's Defense Weekly. Now, we have here, the Bush administration sought Ahmad's removal after learning from the Central Bureau of Investigations, India equivalent of the FBI, that he has facilitated a transfer of funds to lead hijacker Muhammad Atta. Ahmad, they're talking about General Mahmoud Ahmad, who was in Washington 2 weeks around the attack. He had facilitated a transfer of funds to Muhammad Atta, who essentially was just a patsy. They needed a high-profile group of patsies so they could pull this off and have somebody to blame it on. Now, we'll go further into this book. This book claims there's no conspiracy, but here they put out unbelievable amounts of evidence. Here's Pakistan. When the New York Times first broke the shocking story, quoting unnamed U.S. intelligence officials, the White House refused to discuss Pakistan's role in aiding North Korea's nuke program. So here we have Pakistan, who's getting aid from the United States, hoping to help North Korea with their nuclear program. Here's Seymour Hersh, the New Yorker magazine, the cold test. He says, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the group responsible for monitoring treaty compliance. Nevertheless, on July 5th, the President's National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, who presumably had received the CIA reports weeks earlier, made it clear in a letter to the congressman that the Bush administration would continue providing North Korea with shipments of heavy fuel and nuclear technology. So, we're running around giving all our enemies anything they need so we can use them as enemies later. We've armed Saddam Hussein. Now we're we've armed the Taliban. Here's a report. CIA worked in tandem with Pakistan to create the Taliban. London. Selig Harrison from the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. He says the CIA made a historic mistake in encouraging Islamic groups from all over the world to come to Afghanistan. This is when they were fighting the Russians. The U.S. provided $3 billion for building up these Islamic groups. So the United States is creating the Taliban. We're over there fighting the Taliban now. We created them. Selig Harrison tried to stop the CIA. He was an advisor to them. Okay, now here's an article out of Associated Press. Now, the thing to do is, if these articles sound bogus to you, I'm telling you where the site is, the Associated Press. It says, agency was to crash plane on 9/11. And what the government describes as a bizarre coincidence, one U.S. intelligence agency was planning an exercise September 11th, at which an errant aircraft would crash into one of its buildings. Okay, so here they are saying that they're going to fly a plane into a building on 9/11. So obviously, this must have had something to do with what Norman Mineta was saying, how Cheney knew this was going on, and here they had the plan to just fly the plane into a building. This was a confusing thing for the people that were trying to actually keep track of what was going on that day. Here's another story from Seymour Hersh in the New Yorker magazine, where he says the administration, however, American intelligence officials, high-ranking military, said that Pakistanis were indeed flown to safety in a series of nighttime airlifts that were approved by the Bush administration. And who were the high-ranking military officers? Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters. So the administration, when nobody was looking, flew all the higher-ups in Al-Qaeda and Taliban out of the country to save them. All right, there was this report on the internet. CIA agent met bin Laden in July. It was out by the French press, where they named the CIA agent. I believe I have the report here somewhere. Anyways, here's the poster for Osama bin Laden, and what he's wanted for is in connection with the August 7, 1998 bombing in Tanzania, Kenya, but at no time does it bring up the 9/11 event. The FBI say they don't have enough evidence to indict him. Here's a story I got out of the New Yorker about John O'Neill. John O'Neill was the head of the anti-terrorism task force for the FBI. According to agents on the scene, O'Neill's people were never given the authority they needed for a proper investigation. This is talking about when they were investigating terrorism in Yemen. O'Neill came home feeling that he was fighting the counterterrorism battle without support from his own government. He goes to work on 9/11 for the security of the Twin Towers and dies there. Okay, here's a report. Security and Exchange Commission investigates pre-attack trading. They were selling short the stock of the two airlines that flew those four planes were owned by during the 9/11 attack. It's just incredible. Here's a story out of Knight Ridder. Air Force officer suspended after charging Bush knew of 9/11 threat. The gentleman's name is Stephen Butler, lieutenant colonel. He complained that he was forced to take Muhammad Atta and a couple others and train them so they had no speech impediment, no notice of Islamic tone in their voice. They taught them how to speak without dialect so they wouldn't be picked out immediately. It's a language school for spies. And here's Muhammad Atta, who we claim, or I don't, but our corporation government claims was one of the ringleaders. But I have something else here. I'm hoping you can you can clear up here. This is off of Federal Emergency Management's website. Now the picture in the bottom, right here, they want you to believe a whole plane went into that. No engine holes on either side, no wings, no rudder hole, just one little hole. Now the picture on the upper, the gentleman is across the highway. You can see there's no body of a plane there. And what do they find? I'm not sure if you can see it too good. Let's see. See the wheel from the engine? That is not a 757 wheel, an engine wheel. Now, these facts, they're being hidden. It's coming out in the reports. Like here's a Associated Press report. It's from AP, Associated Press, Susan Walsh. It says, at least some White House personnel were given Cipro 6 weeks ago. This is on October 24th. So they were on Cipro the night of the September 11 attacks. So they had prior knowledge at the White House about that. And here's the French press where the agent met with in Dubai with Osama in July, just prior. His name is Larry Mitchell. And he met in Dubai. So what I'm getting at here is that we are being hoodwinked, and the people in the United States, we're not getting the full story from our press. The press is owned by 5 corporations. Now you can believe Fox or you can believe PBS or NPR. They all have contributors. And the contributors are the ones that will have the last word on what's being said. And I have an article at home by Bill Moyers, who it's called Information Tyranny, where they can bend and mold the information to whatever they want it to be. There's a group within the United States government called the Office of Strategic Information. And that office, they put out news stories to the press, and they've been caught paying several thousands of dollars to press outlets so they can get false stories on the airwaves. Remember what I opened with one of the owners of Fox is promoting promoting the mosque behind the scenes. That is the big controversy on the network. So it's all theater. You're getting theater instead of news. And here, okay, here's something from the Crude Politics. The Saudis are active at every level of the terror chain, from planners and financiers, from ideologists to cheerleaders, according to a Rand Corporation briefing. Saudi Arabia supports our enemies and attacks our allies. There isn't anybody out there. We help the Saudis. We help the Pakistanis. These are the guys that are involved with this. The Israelis. Essentially what's happening is people are being led to believe that it's country against country. When that's for us, that is for them to manipulate.